For those of you joining us for the first time, I say a very, very big welcome. For those returning to our webinar again, I say a big welcome to you as well. In April, just about maybe 2 months ago, we tackled the causes and effect of inflation in agriculture. But today, what we have done is narrow it down to the effect of the rising input costs in agriculture industry. And my name is Prince Yawson, a senior global market analyst here at Tridge, and I'm going to be your host. For the most optimal viewing experience, please click on the layout at the top of the WebEx meeting window and enable the side-by-side mode to view both presentations and our speakers through the webinar. For any help, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your window, and a Tridge team member will assist you as soon as possible. Also, during the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. To briefly just go over the agenda that we have today, Bojan Mijatovic, someone we call Professor here at Tridge, will cover the increases in input costs that we're experiencing recently and the effects these increases in production costs is having on agriculture. After that, I'll then moderate a panel discussion between Tridge Business Development Manager Ferhat Erdem and Global Logistics Specialist based in Mexico, Francisco Moran. Before Bojan takes over, permit me to introduce Tridge to you. Tridge is a leading global sourcing and market intelligence platform. We provide qualitative and quantitative insight on food and agriculture to provide comprehensive solutions for our clients. Our intelligence includes daily analysis on price, regulations, production, seasonality, and more to help our clients understand the market and improve their decision making. If you'd like to learn more about Tridge's intelligence and solutions, please feel free to reach out to us via email or feel free to post questions in the chat. So before I just finally hand over, can I ask everyone to mute their microphones again, if you can do that? Because I think we're getting some feedback. So if everyone can mute your microphones, that would be really, really great. Thank you. So Bojan, everything is set. The attendees are in the meeting. They're waiting for you. So just to pretend as if we're in Broadway, because the stage is set, I will say action. So take over.
Thank you, Prince. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Bojan Mijatovic. I'm a global market analyst for Tridge. In today's webinar, we will cover which fruits, vegetables, and grains are most affected by increased input costs, where do most countries source their pesticide and fertilizers costs, have there been any actions, regulation on these products that are causing major impacts, and at the end, we will tackle with various methods of farming as an alternative. Regarding fertilizer, pesticides, and packing materials, fertilizer prices account for nearly 1/5 of US farm cash costs, with an even greater share for corn and wheat producers. Fertilizer account for 36% of farmers' operating costs for corn and around 35% for wheat. Global consumption of fertilizers is increasing, totaling a volume of nearly 200 billion kilograms of NPK in 2021. Out of this total, slightly less than half are estimated to have been applied to cereals. Of the top 3 cereals, maize was the greatest contributor to world fertilizer consumptions, followed by wheat and rice. In fruits and vegetables, together they represent 15.8% of the world market consumption of fertilizers. Regarding the pesticides, global pesticide use is increasing. During the period of 2000 to 2018, by about 1/3 to 4.1 million tons. The highest contribution came from Asia, followed by the Americas, Europe, Oceania, and Africa. The regional contribution to the world total changed slightly over time, but Asia, the largest contributor, remained stable at 52%. The share of Americas increased from 29 to 32%, while in Europe, usage of pesticides slightly decreased from 14 to 12%. Oceania and Africa applied small amounts of pesticides over time, but Oceania nonetheless had the highest growth in pesticide applications. The pandemic created a perfect storm of packaging price increases over the past 2 years. In the US, International Paper, one of the country's top suppliers of containerboard and corrugated cardboard, warned investors that the supply of cardboard boxes was very low, with supply chain bottlenecks continuing into the rest of the year. The shockwave of these events in Ukraine means businesses are vetting suppliers to ensure that there are no financial leaks to Russia or Belarus, and are looking to resource products from elsewhere in the world. There is also a supply gap in products that have previously been sourced from Ukraine. Timber exports from Ukraine and Russia are valued at $12 billion US, so this will have a significant impact on the pulp, paper, and corrugate industry. Moving on to the next slide, please, Prince. Global fertilizer prices are at near record level and may remain elevated throughout 2022 and even beyond. Price increases in fertilizers are due to increased demand in emerging markets, especially for cereals production such as corn and other crops used for biofuel production. Global fertilizer demand remains strong, resulting in higher fertilizer prices in 2022. Fertilizer prices have risen nearly 30% since the start of 2022, following an 80% surge in 2021. Soaring fertilizer prices are driven by a variety of factors, including surging input costs of natural gas and coal, supply disruptions caused by sanctions in Belarus and Russia, and export restrictions in China. Urea prices have surpassed their 2008 peaks, while phosphates and potash prices are nearing 2008 levels. Fertilizers are now at their least affordable level since the 2008 global financial crisis. Moving on to the next slide. On this graph, it can be seen how the price of glyphosate from China increases are influenced by various factors: seasonal demand, pandemics, weather anomalies, supply chain disruptions, and input or cost of production like the key intermediate price increase. On the other hand, the production of pesticide is less energy consuming than fertilizers, but more technologically advanced. Years of intensive research, examination, and toxicology testing are put into the production of active substances before they can be released on the market. Glyphosate has been present on the market since 1974, and with stricter environmental regulations, its days are numbered in the EU. Pressure on manufacturers to produce more eco-friendly pesticides, as well as the global situation regarding actuation and logistics problems, will keep the prices of all pesticides high. Moving on to the effects of increased production costs on agriculture. Major producers of fertilizer, top countries combined, China, Russia, the United States, India, and Canada produce more than 60% of world's fertilizer in nutrients. Russia and the United States each produce less than 10% of global fertilizers, while China produces approximately 25%. The degree of concentration in production increases with individual components of the NPK complex. 10 countries produce from 70 to 95% of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium fertilizer, respectively. Nitrogen fertilizers are primarily made from nitrogen in the air and produced by the Haber-Bosch process. The Haber-Bosch process is the main industrial procedure to produce ammonia, combining nitrogen from the air with hydrogen under extremely high pressures and temperatures. This process requires lots of natural gas. Given the availability and price of natural gas, many countries are limited in their capacity to engage in such extensive production. Phosphorus and potassium, on the other hand, are mined minerals, but also their reserves are not available in many countries. China produces more than 1/3 of world's phosphorus, followed by the United States, India, Morocco, and Russia, respectively. Combined, these 5 countries produce more than 3/4 of the global supply of phosphorus. Potassium production is by most concentrated. 2/3 of all potassium reserves are supplied by only 3 countries: Canada, Russia, and Belarus. Canada produces approximately 30% of the global potassium supply, with Russia and Belarus combined produce the same quantities. Because crop production uses these three macro fertilizers in some combinations, almost every country relies on obtaining their fertilizers from the few countries with available fertilizers. Other significant fertilizer producers include Indonesia, Egypt, Pakistan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. We can move to the next slide. Who are the major suppliers and buyers of fertilizers? Principle is the same. The biggest producers are the major suppliers and also exporters. The main fertilizer exporters fall along the line with the highly concentrated producers. Russia, Canada, the EU, China, and Belarus export more than 60% of all fertilizers. EU, China, Russia, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia export around 60% of nitrogen fertilizers. For the phosphorus fertilizers, 75% are exported by China, Russia, EU, Morocco, and the United States. For potassium, what we mentioned before, around 90% is exported by just a few countries like Canada, Russia, Belarus, Morocco, and the United States. The simple fact that there are few exporters, disruptions from any of these major exporters may cause significant fertilizer shortages and increases in prices. Other major suppliers include Germany, Netherlands, South Korea, and Japan. Can move on the next slide, please. Who are the large importers of fertilizers? Fertilizer imports are normally dictated by a country's crop production area and the type of crops being produced. A country's blending facilities influence its imports since it needs nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to manufacture blended fertilizers. Brazil, Canada, and Mexico heavily depend on imported fertilizers. They import more than 60% of their fertilizers. US also imports 20% of all its fertilizers, even though it has their own production, but the majority potassium-based fertilizers. Some of these imports are likely being used by manufacturing and blending facilities to make compound fertilizers for the use of re-export. Mexico and Brazil are highly dependent and receive more than 25% of their imports from Russia and Belarus. This is a considerable dependency. The rest of the world imports approximately 25% of its fertilizer because of low fertilizer rates. Sub-Saharan Africa countries remains the smallest consumer of fertilizer, consuming less than 20 kilos per hectare on average.
I know. I know the rush.
The United States purchased 14% of its imported fertilizer from Russia and 3% from Belarus. Because Russia and Belarus are two of the limited suppliers of potassium-based fertilizers, economic sanctions on Russia and direct sanctions on Belarus potash are negatively impacting the global potash supply. On to the Chinese pesticide. Next slide, please. Production of pesticide in China. China is at the same time the biggest producer, exporter, and consumer of pesticides. In first quarter of 2022, China exported more than 500,000 metric tons of pesticide. They are down by almost 9% in volume year on year, but they are up in value. Total value amounted to $2.83 billion US. This is up almost 60% year on year. The average unit price increased by almost 80% year on year. From a product category perspective, the export of herbicides is of the largest volume, with around 300,000 tons, which are down slightly by 0.12% year on year, but also very high in value, up to $2.06 billion, which is increases in 107.74% year on year. The main destinations for the export of herbicides from China included Brazil, Australia, United States, Nigeria, Ukraine, and Russia. Insecticides and fungicides remained behind herbicides, with similar countries involved. The main destinations for export of insecticides included Brazil, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Peru. US, Germany, France, and India also aligned with the top 5 exporters of pesticides. Since the worldwide outbreak of COVID-19, food security has attracted the attention of all countries where crop planting area is expanded and demand for pesticides is increasing. In addition, prices of raw materials and other costs have increased, which drives the sharp price rise of global pesticide supply since 2021. The price rising trend has slowed down in 2022, but industry experts predict that pesticide prices will still remain high for a period of 2 years. Since Russia and Ukraine are both the world's major grain producers and exporters, after the occurrence of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it is expected that China's export to these two countries may decline. Next slide, please. Increased labor and packaging costs. Labor was a problem in agriculture even before the pandemics. Agribusiness and agriculture had really struggled with labor in general. Fruits and vegetable harvest involve a lot of labor and transportation. In transportation, truck drivers have been and remain in short supply. In Ecuador, on banana production costs, around 38% of total production costs go to indirect or direct labor costs, and 7% of total costs go to the packaging material. Changes in regulation in EU, for example, where the forced plastic ban. Plastic packaging is forbidden in France and as of August in the rest of the EU countries. Fruits and vegetables under 1.5 kilogram can no longer be sold in plastic bags. And beside this, producers and farmers must now deal with the price of hike of cardboard and must invest in new packaging machinery. Supply chain disruptions continue to affect the food and packaging industry, with limited supplies of packaging material, primarily glass, containerboard, cardboard, and aluminium. Combined with constant labor issues and the shortage of cargo containers to move bulk materials, these challenges will continue to increase the pressure on manufacturers and suppliers to meet growing demand. We can move to the next slide. Breaking down the fruit and vegetable production costs. Ways to measure pesticide and fertilizer use. The sheer volume of production dictates fertilizer and pesticide use. Fruits and vegetables together represent almost 60% of the world market fertilizer use, with fruits consuming 7.2% of the total and vegetables 8.6%. Fruits and vegetables with most consumption of fertilizer and pesticides are bananas. Bananas consume the most fertilizer by a very large margin, requiring a whopping 437 pounds of nitrogen, phosphate, and potash fertilizer per acre of cultivation, followed by citrus fruits. Percentage of input cost in banana production based on various sources and focusing on main input costs. Fertilizers can consume up to 48% of input costs. Pesticides in bananas around 18.2%, hired labor 20%, irrigation almost 10%, and 8.7% goes on other costs. In potato production, the differences are with fertilizers and pesticides. Potato production requires less fertilizers, and fertilizers in production cost of potatoes goes around 27%. Pesticides are increased 28.2% in potato production, and seed is also a major cost in potato production with 80%. Storage almost 24%, and hard labor 2.6%. This is based on US data, where the potato production is highly mechanized. Regarding the pesticide consumption, berries, especially raspberries and strawberries, takes the lead in fruit sectors, while potatoes dominate in the vegetable department. Strawberries are the crop that is most heavily dosed with pesticides in America. On average, 300 pounds of pesticides are applied to every acre of strawberries, compared to an average of 25 pounds per acre for other fruits. 36 different pesticides are commonly used in strawberries, and 90% of strawberries tested registered pesticide contaminations above safe levels. We can move on to the next slide. Grain production cost breakdown. With grain, maize dominates the fertilizer consumption and also for the pesticide. Maize was the greatest contributor of world fertilizer consumption with 16.2%, followed by wheat and rice. Largest national fertilizers used for rice is in India, almost 29%, maize in US, 47%. In EU, wheat and grassland consumed the most fertilizers with 26 and 16% respectively, and soybean and sugarcane in Brazil, 40 and 14% respectively. Percentage of input cost in maize production. Most of the production cost went to fertilizer. Worst case scenario, up to 43% of production cost in maize production goes on fertilizers. Then seed with 23%, around 7%. Drying, higher labor, crop insurance, and storage all fall below 10% of the input costs. Analyzing the cost of maize production in the last 3 years, the most substantial costs were from fertilizers, climbing up by almost 60% compared to 2020 and 50% compared to 2021. Pesticides cost didn't increase as much, but surely significant, 22% compared to 2020 and 18% on year-on-year basis. We can move on to the next slide, please. Coming on to the Tridge intelligence and data and their part. The bottom line of rising input cost reflections on the wholesale prices. On Tridge platform, comprehensive data and intelligence in food and agriculture can be found. Data analysis, along with Tridge analysis, depict valuable and reliable analysis of different data sets, including prices, exports, import, and production, with an extensive variety of products and markets related for food and agriculture. Local insights from the on-field managers and in cooperation with market analysts give a clearer picture of egg prices and what drives them. In the data analysis, you can find various analysis of price and price movement. For example, high input cost pushing up Costa Rican pineapple prices despite high supply. In this data analysis, Costa Rican pineapple increased prices almost 24% in June 22 due to high input costs. For Mexican lemon price, still on this slide, please. Mexican lemon prices on the rise due to abnormal weather and high cost of fertilizers. Lemon price in Mexico increased uncontrollably by 182% year on year. Supply shortages and high production costs led to the price surge in March this year, 2022. Asparagus price in Spain is another example of Tridge analysis. Also good Tridge analysis was the corn price in Colombia, which directly depicts the whole point of this webinar. Corn prices in Colombia surges because of low supply and high input costs. The price of Colombian corn increased by 70% year on year in week 4 of June 22. Increased fertilizer costs halted farmers from expanding corn planting area and relying more on corn imports. The US, a major corn supplier to Colombia, reduced corn production by 4% year on year in 2022 due to heat waves in Midwest region. The supply shortage led to Colombian corn prices to surge in June 2022. These are some of examples of Tridge and their importance of the data analysis and price movement that can be found on Tridge platform. Moving on to the next slide, please. Export bans and logistic problems. Restrictions and bans on fertilizer export impact on global supply. Russia originally imposed restrictions on nitrogen, phosphate, and potash fertilizer exports until June 2022, effectively removing nearly 15% of the global supply in July 2022. Restrictions are lifted. Belarus, a major source of potash for the EU, South America, and the US, is also not exporting its potash because of troubles getting the product through the port of Klaipėda in Lithuania. China restricted fertilizer export in an effort in 2021 to stabilize local demand. Although fertilizer prices began rising in 2021, many producers were able to avoid the surge in fertilizer prices because the fertilizers used for this year's planting season were purchased in 2021. In cases in which fertilizers was purchased in 2022, many producers had to approximately adjust their fertilizer mixes to match the planted crop acreage, minimizing their fertilizer expenditures. Moving on to the next slide, please. Implications of rising input costs. For grain producers, crop change in favor to soybeans. Because soybeans, it requires less fertilizers. Most farmers will decide to plant soybean instead of maize or any other culture. The reduce in overall acreage planted, while others choose to maintain acreage but change crop mix or modify other practices, such as lower fertilizer usage. Brazil, for example, reduced in Q1 of 2022 fertilizer imports by 15% year-on-year basis. This will negatively impact second corn crop production for 2022 in Brazil. Sub-Saharan African countries have already seen a reduction in their fertilizer use with short supplies, bottlenecks, and low stocks and high prices. Rising prices of grains pushed some countries to made export bans. Algeria, Egypt, India, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, Ukraine, Russia, and Serbia are just some of the countries that banned export or limited export of grains. For fruits and vegetables, changing in planting or switching to other crops is not an easy option. Fruits and vegetable sector also experience a rise in input costs and increases cost of production. Lack of supply, deterioration of quality of fruits and vegetables will be just some of the consequences of rising input costs. At the moment, only Iran and Tunisia banned some export of fruits. Global outcome will depend and have a more profound impact on the 2023 planting decision for grains. But for the fruits and vegetables, it will depend on the local demand and supply because the purchasing power of consumers. Moving on to the last slide. How can we alleviate the impact of rising costs? There are many ways, but we have divided them to macro and alternative ways of farming. Macro methods of reducing impact of rising costs should increase the food supply, resolve logistical bottlenecks, release stocks, and resist the urge to impose food export restrictions. In particular, Southeast Asian countries must band together and avoid the crisis spreading to rice markets through trade restrictions. In the short term, the world needs oil-producing nations, often huge net importers of food, to increase fuel supplies to help bring down fuel, fertilizer, and shipping costs. Governments, international institutions, and even the private sector must offer social protection via food or financial aid for the farmers. What are some alternatives of farming? Sustainable agriculture is always relevant when reducing fertilizers. Organic agriculture, good agriculture practice, but focus on crop rotation and what is more important, soil analysis. This relates to nitrogen use efficiency, to use nitrogen efficiently and not to waste it. Change in subsidiary system, promote techniques of lower fertilizer usage and use of organic fertilizers and biopesticides. Other alternative methods include vertical farming, aquaponics, hydroponics, flex farms, and all different modern ways how to reduce fertilizer usage and pesticide usage. Smart agriculture, and not to forget the digital platforms like Tridge, where you can find all the relevant data for the price movement and actual data from the agriculture. Thank you, Prince. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. This is the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bojan. That's the conclusion of your presentation, but that's not the conclusion of the whole webinar. So we'll continue. I think that was a very good chapter and verse dissection of the whole topic that we looked at today. For me personally, the key takeaways from your presentation was increased cost in fertilizer prices, the increase in paper, pulp, and packaging, and then increase in labor costs as well. And there's one thing that you said just before we go to our panelists, Ferhat and Francisco, who are going to answer some few questions. You did mention that, I think that was your first slide, the pandemic created a perfect storm for price increases, which is quite right, because just this morning I was looking at Brent crude prices, and it's just around maybe 100 USD per barrel, which is quite, I mean, it's come down a little bit, but it's still quite high looking at the long-term price trend. Based on that, I think the first question that I'm going to put to our panelists, that will be to, all right, how have fuel costs contributed to increase agriculture input costs? Ferhat, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, thanks, Prince. And thanks, Bojan. It was an excellent presentation. And welcome, everyone. Yeah, nitrogen is actually the most important nutrient and mainly derived from natural gas and is closely tied to the price of fossil fuel. Price of natural gas dramatically increased during early 2021 as countries reopened their economies with the easing COVID-19 restrictions. When demand surged and natural gas suppliers failed to ramp up production, prices for natural gas spiked in the second half of 2021 and continued to remain at high levels in the first months of 2022. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February, which Russia is one of the largest gas and fertilizer supplier in the world, the situation put further pressure on the prices, and with nitrogen quotations mirroring the upward trend for natural gas as well. Well, fertilizers are not only the input required to produce crops actually. The dependence of agricultural sectors on fossil energy sources is increasing globally, either directly in the form of petroleum or petroleum derivatives like gasoline, diesel, and lubricants, or indirectly through natural gas and coal to produce agrochemicals and ultimately electricity. When it comes to food processing, electricity also features heavily in the cost schedule.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ferhat, for that answer. I think the next question that I'm going to put to you, it's how have countries reacted to address the increases in energy prices? So how have countries reacted to address the increases in energy prices? I'm sure you'd want to take that, Ferhat.
Yeah, Prince, thank you. Well, actually, it's a kind of complicated problem, and it arrived suddenly to the governments and countries. So there are lots of approaches for helping farmers and consumers, and some of them are supporting farmers with subvention payments for their harvesting, and also improving affordability for food. Some countries also implement reduced rates of value-added tax to encourage economic operators to contain retail prices. And some governments planning energy rebates to households and also cutting tax rates to help households struggling with rising inflation and higher energy costs as well. And on the other side, politicians encouraging people for saving individual energy consumption, which would lead for us to have a minimal lifestyle.
All right, thank you for that. Francisco, let me get you involved in this. I mean, the big elephant in the room, it's COVID, and everyone is talking about it, and we received loads of questions on COVID. So the next question that I'll put to you, Francisco, is how has COVID-19 changed the transportation industry in Mexico, where you are?
Hi, hello, Prince. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. Well, as you know, COVID-19 has impacted not only Mexico, has impacted to the whole world. So the logistic is a necessity for the daily life and economic growth in general. Transport provides us access or provide access to the jobs, to markets, to essential services. Also provide access to affordable food options for all the people. So the COVID pandemic has been one of the most significant global crises of the 21st century. The impact has been very high. Some things that have changed on the transportation industry in Mexico, and I think in the whole world, are the increase on the freight cost, the reduction in exports and imports in shipments, A lot of companies reduce their activities because of the pandemic. Global manufacturing processes decrease their operations on the supply chain. Even another companies stop their activities or their operations because of the inflation and because of the pandemic. Some impacts as a result of the pandemic are the reduction of the activities, as I said already, decrease in productivity and collapse of billing in most of the companies, the suspension of activities, essential activities in some companies. This impact was very high for the transportation industry because obviously the quantity of shipment it wasn't the same because the restriction or the order was to close some not essential companies. We know the pandemic has not over, so its impacts will continue, and the economic recovery will be very slow for nation and for worldwide economies.
Thank you, Francisco. The next question I think is partly answered in answering the first question, but can you be specific on telling everyone how has increased transportation cost affected agriculture trade?
Yeah, sure. Well, in general, the number of shipments have decreased for two reasons. One reason is the impact in the on the price of the final product, and also the inflation creates this high increment on freight costs and prices. As we know, food is a necessity, and some products or some items had a rebound because of the pandemic. So only for some products, some essential products, because obviously the other ones was not allowed to work or to were necessary or essential for the export. So the main impact has been on the freight cost, the fuel, the inflation, and the high demand of the containers increase the prices. Customers are not buying the same quantity of food as they used to buy before the pandemic. This is another impact. The effects of the low world production. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, carry on, Francisco.
Yes, okay, thank you. The effects of the low world production and the temporary close of some borders have impact to the transportation cost and the transportation industry. So the impact has been at least 25% of the cost of the shipments, of the freight cost.
Okay, that's good. I mean, you did mention, Francisco, that shipment has decreased, and from the presentation that we've had and from the panel discussion, we realize that this is on the basis of prices of transportation going up. So we're seeing transportation costs going up, and the level of shipments as well, as you said, has come down. Now, the next question I'll put to you, partly related, is what are the possible ways to reduce transportation cost going forward?
Okay, sure. Well, unfortunately, the cost won't be the same after the pandemic because we know the reasons, the inflation and the increment of the increase of the fuel. So that my recommendation is try to optimize orders, take better routes about the best time. Another recommendation is to have a good planification in their activities and take always the best option in cost and time, because unfortunately, won't be a reduction on the cost, on the freight cost. Another things that can help to reduce the impact on the freight costs are a better strategic planning, inventory and storage control, good relationship with the suppliers, always focus in the logistic process performance, and try to always focus on the process automation.
Thank you, Francisco. So for me, I picked two things from your answer to that question. So how do we go about it? Optimize all this and then choose the best option possible. I think those are two great points that if we're all those involved within the transportation of goods from one place to the other pick from, I guess it would go a long way to help them. I can see Ferhat is pretty bored at this point in time, so I'm going to engage him now by asking him to take the next question. So Ferhat, what are the potential solutions to increase energy cost?
Yeah, this is a huge subject actually, because things are changing quickly all around the marketplaces. And while the developed countries are trying to maintain macroeconomic stability, developing countries are focused on increasing growth rates. And this causes developing countries exporting more. And a side effect is, unfortunately, inflation in those countries. Implementing renewable energy sources into energy grid would be a good solution to reduce the dependency to the fossil fuels, but it seems not possible in the short run. Scientists and manufacturing sector representatives should work on efficiency and cost of the systems urgently, and putting more efforts for balancing the geopolitical stability. For example, Russia and Ukraine and Europe. Russia is not releasing natural gas here to Europe. This causes the energy prices soar, and avoiding COVID lockdowns, which would cause reduce in supply and increasing in demand, which we already had experienced this problem. And on the other side, manufacturers have to take some measures. They should revise the current production lines into energy efficient shape, and using new generation solutions to reduce the dependency for conventional fertilizers. We call it NPK fertilizers. There are some alternatives. Bacteria are amazing creatures, actually. And there are some fertilizers produced from nitrogen fixating bacteria directly from the air. So when they use this product, dependency to industrial nitrogen is decreasing. This is a new kind of solution.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we're unable to go through all the questions because of time constraints. I must say thank you once again to our professor, Bojan, who gave us the presentation, our panelists, Ferhat, Erdem, and Francisco Moran, who have given us a lot to take in today. I must say as well that the presentation slides and a recording of this webinar will be shared in the follow-up email in 3 business days. And also coming with it will be a survey on the webinar. We encourage, of course, everyone who has participated to either, try and answer, the questions that we have on the survey, because we would want to get feedback to see how we can improve and provide more better solutions to those of you attending. On behalf of Tridge's Intelligence and Solutions Division and our presenters and panelists, I'll say thank you so much for joining us today, and you have a great rest of your day. and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.